The prison service has been reduced to lunacy, and the health and safety of the staff working in jails has been compromised. That's what the president of the Prison Governors Association, Andrea Albert, will say today in a conference address to its members. There has been increases of nearly 10,000 prisoners compared to 2 years ago. Joining me now to discuss this is crime and policing commentator Danny Shaw. Danny, is the increase in the prison population creating strain on the system?
Oh, it's creating huge strain, Kevin. It's creating strain in a number of different ways. What it means is that the prisoners are having to be moved around all the time to try and accommodate, space, essentially. It's very destabilizing for the prison system. It means a lot of energy is going into trying to find spaces and trying to do the sort of musical chairs. So that's happening at sort of, at management level, if you like. But what it really means is that there is also, coupled with the shortage of places, there is a shortage of staff. And we've heard about that a lot following the ones with prison breakout. And that means that prisoners are locked in their cells for a long periods of time. They don't get to do the education, the training, the work training, the rehabilitation sorts of activities that they need to do so that when they're released, they don't go on committing further crimes and creating more victims. So that's the sort of strain that it's putting on the system. But prisons are literally running out of space. They are down to about 600 spare places across England and Wales. And that means that in the men's prison estate, there's just a few hundred spare places. Now, you might think, oh, well, that's okay. There's a few hundred spare places. But every week, the population is going up by 100 or 200. It's risen, as you said, 10,000 in a couple of years. In the past year, it's risen by almost 7,000. And it is forecast to go up to 94,000 within 18 months. It's currently 88,000. 94,000 within 18 months. There is not enough capacity in the system, and the prison building plans are way behind schedule. So even though there is a new prison being built in York on the site of Full Sutton Prison, we've got new accommodation which is slowly being ramped up. It's not going to be enough to deal with that expected population increase.
And I suppose, Danny, as well, they are building new prisons, but very slowly, as you say. But if we get them built, we have a staffing problem with the prisons we've already got. I mean, who's going to work there? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's a big recruitment exercise that's been launched by the Ministry of Justice to try and get more people to sign up as prison officers. They've scaled back the training a little bit so that prison officers can be sort of sped through the training process. More of it's going online. So these are all efforts to try and ramp up recruitment. The problem in some areas is that the rates of pay are just not attractive enough compared to other jobs which are less onerous and less risky. I mean, let's face it, Kevin, being a prison officer, I think the prison officers are the most undervalued public servants that we have in our country. I put them on a par with nurses, with doctors, with police officers, what they do every single day. They do, at times, a very dangerous job with some of the most violent criminals. They also have to deal with people having self-harmed, people having killed themselves, having to deal with those situations. And as well as that, you're asking them in some situations to put an arm around the shoulder of a prisoner to help them to try and sort of get them to reform their lives. It's an incredibly difficult job. I don't think they're rewarded enough for what they do. And that's one of the reasons why in some areas of the country there is this shortage.
And because of this shortage and indeed, the shortage of prisons, I guess, some prisons are just basically being reduced to being holding tanks, warehouses where you put people and you try to make sure they don't break out. Now, there's a prison in Northamptonshire called Five Wells. £253 million facility. It's a smart prison, supposed to be modern. The inmates are referred to as residents. There are no bars on the windows, and the net result of all of this seems to be that almost on a daily basis, inmates throw booze and drug-fueled cell parties, clamber onto the roof and share their brazen antics on social media with contraband and mobile phones. And the guards are basically terrified. I've heard about this before, that, you know, in the past, prison guards were plentiful, numerous, and they tended to be ex-army. You didn't mess around with them. If you did mess around with them, they let you know who was in charge. These days, not so much ex-army, and they're terrified of the prisoners, and the prisoners are getting away. I don't suppose getting away with murder is the right phrase, but you take my point. They're just having a 24/7 party. That's got to be wrong.
Absolutely. Five Wells is a very interesting example that you've picked on. It's a new prison that was opened on the site of an old prison, Wellingborough Prison. And the difficulty with a new prison, and we've seen this before with Oakwood Prison when it opened, with Berwyn Prison in Wales when that opened, new prisons struggle quite often in the early months and early couple of years to establish a kind of strong ethos and a strong culture as the prisoners are put into the jail. And if you put too many prisoners in too quickly, then you get the sort of problems that you're getting now at Five Wells. And it may take time for it to settle down there. But my concern is the government's so short of spaces that they're having to put more prisoners into this prison, Five Wells, and Fosse Way, which is a new prison in Leicestershire, more quickly than they should do because they're so short of places. You have to be very, very careful with new prisons. You've got this amazing prison with 1,000, 2,000 spaces. You want to fill it up, but you've got to establish a strong culture and ethos. The other issue is, as you say, probably a lot of new prison staff that don't have those years of experience to be able to handle certain situations or to see danger when it's coming.
Indeed. What do we get? What's the advantage? What's the possible advantage of calling prisoners residents? I even read that in some prisons they've suggested calling them clients. I mean, these are crooks, they're law breakers, they're prisoners. Why don't we call them what they are? Why do we have to call them residents? Why do we have to wrap them up in euphemisms?
Kevin, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, call a prisoner a prisoner. But I have to say, this is not the main issue. And it's not the reason that we're facing a crisis in our prisons. It's really a side issue. I know it's something that, you know, people get exercised about. And I agree. You know, I've got no truck with calling someone who's been sent to prison a resident or, you know, a client. I mean, it's a ridiculous term. But let's focus on the real issue here and what we're going to do about this. Because I tell you what, the government is hoping that it can carry on just adding 100 places here, a couple of hundred places there, step by step until election time. You know, a bit like a toothpaste tube. You're squeezing the last bit of the toothpaste out, and they're hoping that when the election comes, they can hand that toothpaste tube over to the next government and say, right, it's your problem now. That's what they're trying to do with the prison places, because the one thing that this government does not want to do is to introduce an early release scheme to let some prisoners out. They do not want to do that before an election. So they're trying to squeeze places out wherever they can find them, which is why they came up with this idea of renting prison places abroad, overseas. I mean, you know, it could be done, but there are so many logistical issues around it, apart from legal issues. I think it would take months and months to get that up and running. That won't happen in time. And I think this is what they're doing, is they're trying to kind of eke out the places they've got and hope that by the next election, it's either another government's problem or they'll take some difficult decisions after the next election.
Yeah, that's apparently what the president of the Prison Governors Association is going to say, that the Tories are hoping they can just about cope until the election, and then it'll be someone else's problems. She's also going to talk about longer sentencing, partly being the cause in the rise of prison population. I mean, that I think takes matters in a worrying direction. If you start saying, "Oh, well, you're guilty of murder or rape," but frankly, the prisons are so overcrowded, we're going to give you 6 months. Then that is a kind of dysfunctional legal system. The punishment has to fit the crime, doesn't it? The punishment cannot fit the number of cells available.
Yeah, no, look, I absolutely agree with you on that. And I don't think that Andrea Ulbart, the president of the Prison Governors Association, is suggesting that serious offences like murder or rape should be treated leniently. But one of the reasons we're in this population crisis with not enough spaces is because sentences have increased. Now, I'm an absolute believer in long sentences for the violent criminals, and to ensure, firstly, that the public is safe, and secondly, that they get long enough in prison to try and rehabilitate and reform and change their ways so that when they are released, they're safer. I'm absolutely a believer in that. But there are also some prisoners who are in for very short spells of imprisonment that do nothing to help their rehabilitation for less than 6 months. And there are also a record number of prisoners, 14,000, that's about 1 in 6 of the population, 14,000, who are on remand. So they haven't been convicted, they haven't been sentenced. Now, many of those prisoners probably should be in prison on remand, but there may be some who shouldn't and who actually won't be convicted. So I think this is complicated, but I think what you have to do is look at, there may be some people who are locked up on suspicion of more minor offences or very short sentences, where I think you've got to look for tough alternatives in the community, tagging, curfew. That's the only way, I think, to relieve the crisis.
Last question, Danny. As you alluded to earlier, there are suggestions that we might contract out, we might subcontract some of our prisoners to foreign jails. Now, it strikes me that's not that bad an idea, but is there a sort of human rights issue in terms of relatives visiting them? I mean, if they're thousands of miles away in another country, their number of visits from loved ones and family members might be somewhat reduced.
Kevin, I think the only way to do this is if you're going to rent a jail space in some other foreign countries, and as I've said before, I think there's huge logistical issues around that. Whether that will ever happen, I'm really, frankly, doubtful. But the only way to do it would be to put some of the foreign national prisoners who are currently in English jails in those overseas prisons. Currently, there are 10,000 foreign national prisoners in jails in England and Wales, 10,000. The government has repeatedly said, in fact, governments over the years have said, we're trying to do deals with their home countries so that we can send them back to serve their sentences in their home countries. Those deals just never seem to make much dent in that particular population. So it is possible, for example, if you found jail space in Albania or Poland or Romania, for instance, that, which are the top 3 countries where foreign national prisoners are from, that you could actually place them back there in those countries. Equally, if you had someone from an Eastern European country, if you had jails in an Eastern European country and you had a number of Romanian or Polish prisoners, it's possible that you could put them in there. But I think the family connections is the weakest point in that plan, because family ties are really important for helping prisoners when they're released to steer clear of crime. Family connections incredibly important, and you will lose that if we have overseas jails with prisoners from this country. Clearly, that would be lost, and I think, yeah, there could be human rights challenges, but it's not just that. It is actually a practical issue. It is incredibly important for rehabilitation, and we don't want prisoners to come out and commit more crimes. So we have to do things that will stop that. And one of those things is maintaining family ties.
Good to talk to you, Danny. Thank you so much for your time. That's Danny Shaw, policing and crime commentator.